Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I am doing exactly what I suggested I might be doing in last week's video, and I am going to be talking about a semi-definitive list of worst nightmares by Crystal Sutherland, because I made my Finally Fall tag video last week and I mentioned it for the "what fictional household would you like to spend some time with" question. And it made me go, ooh, it's been a while since I've read it, and I can't really remember it, but I knew it was one of my favourite books from a few years ago, and so I thought, good time to read it again, and so I did. But one of the things I found most interesting reading it this time was that my thoughts on it had changed a fair bit since the last time I read it. I didn't love it in quite the same way as I did last time, but I think that may have been because I spent a little bit of time on Storygraph before reading it, looking at other people's reviews of Crystal Sutherland's first book, Our Chemical Hearts, and hearing a lot of seemingly very justified criticisms of it. And so I think that put me in a more critical mindset going into this book. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it did slightly affect my enjoyment, which was not ideal, but it did mean I was viewing it in a slightly more analytical way, which isn't necessarily bad. I gave a very poor synopsis in last week's video. Well, it wasn't awful, but I definitely got a few key details wrong, so I will give you an updated synopsis now so that I can make sure I am genuinely representing the book. Here it is. A semi-definitive list of worst nightmares is about a girl named Esther Solar, who lives in a small town with her decidedly messed up family. Since her grandfather met death back in Vietnam while he was fighting in the Vietnam War, her family has been cursed so that each of them will be killed by the thing that they fear the most. This has already claimed a number of Esther's family members since the book has begun, but the one that sticks with her the most is that her grandfather, the one who met death, was told that he would die by drowning, and so since then he does not go out in the rain, he doesn't take baths, he refuses to live anywhere near the sea just in case he drowns. This is the level to which the curse affects every member of her family, and Esther is the one member of the family who hasn't yet worked out what it is that will kill her. So she has started making a list of semi-definitive worst nightmares of what could be it, so that she can avoid them for the rest of time. But disaster strikes when her childhood crush, a known kleptomaniac, Jonah Smallwood, robs her one day while she's waiting for the bus, and among the other things he takes her list of semi-definitive worst nightmares. Jonah convinces her that the only way to break the curse would be to get to meet death himself, if indeed he does exist, and ask him to break the curse, because Esther has watched the majority of her family descend into really unhealthy ways of living in order to avoid death. And in particular she is most worried about her brother Eugene, and she is desperate to save him and her mother and her father, so she agrees to embark on a quest of facing each of the worries on her list, in the hope that one of them might be it that could kill her, so they can then summon death to her, and she can bargain with him to save Eugene and the rest of her family. But of course, on the way, there are twists and turns, and she starts to realise things about herself and her family and the curse and death that she had never previously questioned, and her whole way of thinking is changed through trying to face each of these fears. I would say one of the most immediate plus points of this book is the style of writing. Crystal Sutherland has nailed this sort of snarky teen voice where, even though it is through a third-person narrative perspective, you still get that snark and banter and, you know, a bit of swearing, a bit of innuendo, but in really genuinely hilarious ways, so that the whole way through you get these brilliant little glimpses into Esther's mind as they think about the things that they are trying to do in order to help Esther, but more broadly about life and death itself, which is thoroughly entertaining and a really unique way of writing. Another thing I find really interesting with this book is the way it deals with mental illness, because of course Esther genuinely believes that she and her family are cursed, that this is an unavoidable thing that was done to them by death itself, and that is completely unavoidable. And throughout the book she is forced to confront the idea that this is inevitable, that this is the way she lives until the day she dies, and that she will spend the entirety of her life living in fear of this one thing, whatever it may be. And given she's created a list of all these things that she thinks could kill her so that she can avoid them, there are 50 things on the list by the time Jonah steals it. That's a pretty sizable list of things that she is having to avoid in order to supposedly keep herself safe. And so through having to challenge that, she starts to think about what could happen if she stopped believing that this was the only way of living. Jonah introduces her to the idea by presenting her with a box with a flash drive inside of a video he's taken of them confronting her first fear, which was the last thing she added to the list, which is lobsters, hence the cover. And on the box he has written, "Everything you want is on the other side of fear." And that is the first time she starts to think about what it might be like if her life wasn't ruled by fear. Mental illness does often feel like a curse, but the only way that Esther can actually try to change the way she lives is by defying it, is by trying to fight back against it and do something to stop it from having such a rule over her life. She has seen her mother drain the family of money by being addicted to gambling. She has not seen her father in a very long time because he is agoraphobic and shut himself in the basement downstairs after suffering a stroke. And her brother has to have every single light in the house taped on because he is so terrified of the dark. She has seen what happens when a curse overtakes a family, and for the first time in the book, she actually considers what might happen if she didn't let it rule her life. I think the way that this book deals with mental illness in terms of acknowledging that it feels completely all-powerful when you are submersed in it, but also showing that the only way to survive against it is to do the opposite of what it's telling you to do, is so powerful. And by showing it as this slightly whimsical story about a curse and her grandfather possibly meeting death for real, I think puts it in a really interesting and valuable setting for you to be able to challenge your own beliefs about mental health and about how Esther views her mental health. Because the first time I read it, I was happy to accept that this story was slightly fantasy based and that, yes, Reginald Solar really did meet death, her family really was cursed. But this is sort of my third or fourth time reading it, and by this point I know, slight spoiler alert, I'll put my hand up just so you know there is a slight spoiler. This time when I read it, I knew for a fact that there is no curse. Her family is just a family of mentally ill people. And to read it with that in mind and to know that Esther has effectively been deluding herself the entire time by hoping that it's a curse, because if it's a curse there's nothing you can do about it, was really, really interesting. It gave me a whole new perspective of the story and of Esther and the general struggles of the family. I think the most important and valuable message in this story that I picked up this time, that I definitely didn't pick up the other times I'd read it, was about forgiveness and about love. For a lot of the book, Esther is really angry at her parents and at her brother Eugene for being mentally ill, in effect, and she is angry that she has been left on her own to fend for herself while they battle with their own demons. And I think this is the first time I really got the bit at the end where Eugene, after a hospital visit, says to her that you have to love people sometimes because love is the only thing they can offer. And the first time I read it, I think I took that as a very frail statement of you have to love people because it's the right thing to do, but this time I really understood it. I think I will in fact find the passage in which he says that because it's worded so brilliantly. Okay, so there are two passages that I think are the most powerful at talking about love and forgiveness in this book, and so I'm going to read them both out. The first one is a realisation that Esther herself has when she is hugging her mother after a particularly emotional moment of the book, which I will not spoil, but I will just read this out. Esther thought she finally understood the woman who'd raised her. Jonah had once told her that one day everyone would realise that their parents were human beings, and that sometimes they were good people and sometimes they were not. What he failed to mention, what she was only coming to appreciate at that exact moment, was that most of the time people were neither good nor bad, not righteous or evil. They were just people. And sometimes love, even if it was all they had to offer, was enough. It had to be. And I think that is such a powerful and important message to put in a young adult book about facing fear and facing mental illness and about letting people into your life that have hurt you. Because Esther was incredibly hurt by Jonah when she was young. He moved schools shortly after he had given her a Valentine's card, and that had made her quite an angry child. And for him to return to her life once she was 17 and to rob her and then force her to confront all her fears was quite a lot for her to deal with. And there were moments when she felt entirely betrayed by Jonah. But I think it is an incredibly important message to put in what is marketed as a love story, which I completely disagree with. But I think it is a very powerful message to say that people make bad choices and you can love them regardless of those bad choices. In the similar vein, this is something that Eugene says to Esther after he makes a decision that hurts her a lot. He says, "I know you think love is dangerous, but I look at you and me and I don't see that." "Really? Because you have more power to destroy me than anyone else. I gave you that control by loving you, and you went and... I will not spoil. Why would I want to give anyone else the power to hurt me like that? That's just the thing. It has nothing to do with you. So maybe love isn't the poison you think it is. Maybe people just make mistakes. Maybe they're even worthy of our forgiveness if they hurt us." I think this is such a valuable discussion to be having in a young adult book, because I think this is an incredibly powerful and nuanced take on love and forgiveness and on human nature in many ways as well, about fearing commitment and fearing trusting other people, because to trust someone else is to give them that power to hurt you. And I don't think I've seen or read or heard anywhere a book or a story in general that teaches that people are allowed to make mistakes and people can hurt you, and that doesn't mean that they are irredeemable or bad people and that they cannot be trusted to love you the right way. And so I will give a slight spoiler now for the end of the book, just because I want to discuss this, because this is something that was really a revelation for me the third or fourth time I read it just now. Esther ends up splitting up with Jonah after she realises he has leaked the videos of her completing her challenges against her fear online, and she doesn't talk to him for a long while. But then there's a time skip at the end of the book to the video in which she completes the final challenge, which she screens to a lot of people, and it is revealed that she and Jonah got back together. And the first time I read that, I felt slightly betrayed. I thought, why would Esther go back to someone that betrayed her, that broke her trust like that? But I think that, at least in this book, with Esther's personal growth, this was absolutely the right choice. Throughout the book, Esther is learning to trust again and to be able to love people who she knows will make mistakes. The whole way through the book, she dresses in costume purely because she thinks it defends herself against other people judging her as just her. And so to be able to give who she is to Jonah after he has made such a big mistake, I think is the very important character development that you need to see in this book, which is that she has got past all the fears that she thinks she has, because Jonah makes her confront this as well. He says, "You've got this stupid list. You don't really think any of those are going to kill you. You're scared of trusting people. You're scared of loving people." And so I think for her to have that huge slap in the face of him calling her out on her bullshit, effectively, and for her to then realise what it is, and to then move on from it, and to then learn to love and trust Jonah again, as well as the rest of her family, I think is a very important message, and I got it this time. And I think that is, I think that is one of the things I most appreciate about this book, is that it is so complex and nuanced, and it discusses such difficult topics in an incredibly complex story with, you know, Reginald Solar talking about the times he met death, with Esther recounting them now that she's reconnected with Jonah, with Esther having to face her fears while still living in a family of mentally ill people who aren't ready to face their own demons yet, is such a valuable and important young adult book. And I really, really appreciate what this book does in handling these topics in a sensitive, careful, and ultimately really, really fun way. It is a fun story to read. Esther and her family are bonkers in the best way. It is such a technicolor story in terms of the little moments and things you find out about the family, with the story of Reginald Solar meeting death in Vietnam, then meeting him again 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. It is such an interesting story that has so many gut-punch revelations that teach you a lot about Esther and about her family and about the way that she perceives the world, that I think it is just an incredible story. And I feel like it taught me a lot as well, because I relate to Esther in a lot of ways, and it was, yeah, a really good book. Oh, I have talked for long enough. There you go. A semi-definitive list of worst nightmares by Crystal Sutherland. Still think it's one of the really best young adult books I've ever read, and I still highly, highly recommend it. I know I said at the beginning of the video that I felt I didn't love it as much this time. Honestly, talking about it, nah, I still love this book. I still adore it and everything it talks about. Thank you very much for watching. If you have read this book, please talk about it with me in the comments below, because I have so many thoughts and feelings about this book, and I think I covered most of them in this video, but I may well have forgotten about some things, so if you have your own thoughts and ideas and things, let me know. Let's talk about it. But generally, like this video if you liked it, feel free to subscribe if you want to hear me talk about books even more. And yeah, thank you very much. I will see you next week. Head empty, no thoughts. I'm not like other girls, I can't think. Filming on the first day of your period is not a good idea. I am spotty and in pain. Ugh.